And looking afresh at your events is exactly what the event canvas was designed for. And I'm now delighted to welcome Ruud Janssen, among many other event-related things, the co-creator of the event canvas. We're going to dive straight in, and I'd like you to tell us, I suppose, a little Twitter-like introduction to what this event canvas is actually for.
Excellent, yeah. So the event canvas is a way to bring a team of people on the same page in order to create the narrative of an event. You could consider it what sheet music is to music. You could consider the event canvas to events. So what we have attempted to do is to decode how events create value. And there's 3 phases in how the event canvas works. So you see an example behind me, and we'll show what that looks like. But it's 3 things that you do. The first thing is you articulate the change of the behavior. The second thing is you frame the problem or you frame the design challenge. The third thing you do is you prototype potential solutions. And you do that from different stakeholder perspectives. The 14 building blocks within those 3 items are fairly simple, and I'll quickly talk you through them. In the change part, it's really about how does somebody enter the event, and what are some of the pains that they have associated with going to this event, or the reason why they're going to this event. And they have a set of expectations. So those are the things before the event actually takes place. You can articulate that for the stakeholder. On the opposite side, you have the exit behavior, which is how does somebody leave the event? What are their behaviors? What do they say and do after the event? What are their gains for having gone to this event? And what is their level of satisfaction offset against the expectation that they had before the event? Together, those elements are called the change. Then you have the frame of the design. This is, on the top part, the soft elements are the commitment. What does somebody commit to in time, for instance, or an opportunity cost to go to this event? What do they expect in return for going to this event? Then what are some of the costs, like fixed and variable costs that they have for going to this event? And what are the potential revenues when they do contribute or participate to this event? And this could be different for different stakeholders. The last 2 elements within the frame part is the jobs to be done and the promise. Once you have that set, you have full clarity about what that event is supposed to do for that stakeholder. Then you have 2 elements left, which is really the design outcome. And that's the experience journey. You'll see that this part is kind of like an hourglass. It's the experience journey of all the touch points you go through as you experience an event before, during, and after the event. And it's the instructional design of all the elements that are part of the content, which are going to be creating some kind of learning. And this could be skills learning or knowledge learning. This could be attitude learning or people learning, getting to know other people. If you combine those 2 elements, you can consider that the prototype of an event, right? That could be a narrative of how you go from beginning to end of that event. What are the touch points? What are the instructional design components? Together, that's the story of the event. People read comic books across the planet, right? So if you can visualize the narrative of an event, just like the way musical sheet music is, it's international, right? Whether you're in Japan or in Tasmania, in Reykjavik or New York, everybody can read Beethoven's Fifth from sheet music and interpret it the way that they would like to have that. So that's in essence what the event canvas is. It's a way to code and decode how events create value using a single sheet of paper.
I suppose briefly, it'd be quite interesting to know a little bit about the history of the event canvas then. I mean, where did the idea start? And what you set out to do? And I suppose the final thing, briefly, who's using it?
Over time, you start to kind of figure out which events are really good, which ones are, which are born to fail, and which ones are mediocre at best. And very often it's by reading the team that's involved in the event that you can get a gist of where it goes, or the clarity that an event owner has about what they want to achieve with that respective event. Decoding how that worked over time. I was, in the first part of my career, I was running events at a 5-star hotel with a convention center. And it was just fascinating to see teams come in with how they're going to execute their events. And because we were always in the same context, we knew this place inside out. We kind of knew what worked and what didn't, and what would be a fantastic event and which one wouldn't be. I think by seeing that over and over again, a number of years, really triggered that feeling that there must be a way to better understand why some work and some don't. On top of that, I think what happened in any form of curiosity is that let's say at one point, my colleague Rolf Frissen and I, who we were heavily involved with MPI for a long time, and we were also trying to figure out where things work or don't work in particular instances. On the board of that association, and Alex Osterwalder, who created the business model Canvas, came to one of our board meetings and was talking about what he had just published called this business model Canvas. And he spoke about the Tower of Babylon and how language gets in the way. And there's a lot of blah, blah around how businesses create value and how you can articulate that as a team and how you can create innovation around businesses. That concept in itself was super triggering in my head because he was able to visualize how a business creates value on a single piece of paper. So my colleague Roel and I started using that in the way that we were looking at how chapters function and how businesses function. And inevitably, you could look at an event as a temporary business, right? So we started applying the business model Canvas to events. But then also we saw that there's quite a few ingredients that are missing to the mix to really make it holistic and be applicable for what makes events so specific and so ungraspable almost. And a lot of people, one of the things he said was, if you don't have serious tools, you can't be a serious profession. And that was kind of like a stab in the side, but very true, right? What we figured is actually, that hurts when you say if you don't have professional tools, you're not, how can you be a profession? There's two ways to deal with that. One of them is complain about it. The other one is do something about it. And we decided to do the latter. And so Roel and I went on this path of discovery where it took us a year to come up with that single piece of paper, which sounds like a ridiculous amount of time, especially if you ask our wives. So it's a long story to the answer of where did it come about. I think cropped up frustrations, we then came out with the event Canvas, and we thought we were done when we published it under Creative Commons. And people are like, oh, let me translate it in another language. Great. It's now in 14 languages because the words still get in the way and the questions are still different in Farsi or in traditional Chinese or in Spanish.
So this was not, it was not a year's journey, and it's not a journey that's ended.
No, we're in the middle of starting it. Yeah.
That probably the morning of the first client arriving at the hotel when you were organising the events. So who's using it now? I mean, what type of organisations
Great question.
and individuals are using it?
Well, a good example might be, just the call I just got off was with the team that's putting together the European Meetings and Events Conference in Seville next year. So MPI has now adopted this as their de facto methodology of designing their events. Which is always nice when your own profession starts using the things that was created for them. They're not the fastest, in adopting your own profession, which is also quite normal. There's currently about, I would say, 8,000 users across the planet. About 1,500 of those have been trained on level 1. I think about 400 are trained on a level 2, and we have 200 people trained on a level 3, which if they complete the level 3, which is a 3-day program at a university, and then 6 months to design that event using the event Canvas with their team. If they submit that and peer reviewed successfully, they can then become certified event designers. The most early adopters were organizations that when they saw the Canvas and they heard the story behind it, they were like, I don't know what it is, but I know that I need it, right? Which is very interesting. So actually the first adopters were organizations that had the design challenge. And they probably had an event owner that was maybe, angry at their event might be a big word, but the event can be a stressful experience for the event owner, right? How, as a team, can you de-stress that? And how can you turn something that's stressful into something that's fun? And I think what they saw is that when we applied, it's fun. The only challenge they had at that time is, how do I do that thing that you guys make look so easy when you do it? Which we developed with those types of organizations. So organizations like MEDEL was one of our first applicants, the International Olympic Committee, ITU at the United Nations, corporate organizations that have been using this now over the last, I would say, since the birth of the event Canvas on February 14th, 2014. So 5 years onwards, there's a whole plethora of users out there that are using it with success. We like to teach them so they can do it with their teams. If they're not proficient yet or the stakes are very high, sometimes they come and find us to help them. And if they're lazy, then they can basically hire us to do it for them. So it's That's kind of the
that
formula.
sounds like there's enough variety in the types of organisations who are using the canvas already to be past this kind of proof of concept.
Yes.
And if you're already having these people at level 1 and level 2 who are using it, there's obviously a clear. You would have confidence saying to, not wanting to put any words in your mouth, but you would be confident saying to the event organisers, the experienced event organisers who are watching or listening to this today, that if they looked at the canvas, they would find a use for that.
Yeah. One caveat: it requires a team, time, and some space to do it. Right. So this is not a solo sport, right? So event design only works if you use multiple people's prefrontal cortex, right? So if multiple people think together about a challenge and then use the process and the mental model of the event canvas, then they can decode the problem and have fun whilst doing it. Okay. What that means in practice is that how we like to approach that is by saying that you need 1% of the total event time of a team of people dedicated to think or to go through this design process. You can also use the event canvas to decode a past event and look at its success or failure. You know, we run into situations where organizers say, our event was super successful and it's been that way for 3 or 4 years, or maybe longer. But if you ask us, what are we doing right? It would be really hard to answer that question, right? So sometimes the way to decode something that went really well, or maybe the event hit a plateau, or maybe it's shrinking in size, and trying to figure out what is it that we're not doing for specific stakeholders that's not answering to their jobs to be done. Is it that we're over-promising and under-delivering? Are we not, gratifying their pains or delivering enough gain? Are we, is their expectation inflated of what they get for their given price? And you can push the buttons on the event canvas literally on where it's going wrong or right from a very specific stakeholder perspective.
Well, that's fantastic. So it's not just a platform where you can launch a new event, but it's a platform where you can look back.
Yeah, it's like a filter. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
It's almost like a Polaroid filter that you can kind of turn and figure out, where.
When I do consultancy, I find that it's easier to have an impact when the stakeholder has already identified that there's something wrong with their event, or that their event can be better. Do you feel that's the same for the canvas? And are people using it when they know that they have an event that could be better, or perhaps their event is shrinking in size or losing attendees? Is that when they're jumping on board, or are they coming in at other points as well?
I think it comes from different angles. It always depends on the context. Sometimes, and you could see that if these are things that are happening outside of the canvas, it could be pressures from the top, from the bottom, from the left, or from the right, right? If the event is not delivering enough behavior change, ultimately people will not show up at the event anymore, right? So maybe people don't think of it in that way, but that's their behavioral outcome of not having enough behavior changed at the event. There could also be a situation where the context of the organization changes, right? So imagine that there's a regulatory change in a specific field, which was one of the reasons for one of our first clients to kind of think about, wow, everything was working, but then something changed on the outside. I've got to rethink how this whole thing works now. And how does this impact that stakeholder, this stakeholder, us as a stakeholder? So it's a way to dissect a new challenge coming their way. It could also be that a new leader comes in and all of a sudden questions that line item that says, hold on, what's this 3.4 million line item here that's called our yearly event, right? What does that deliver, and why is it we've been doing it in this way? Sometimes an event is it's an artifact from the past, maybe, that you want changed or you want eliminated just for the sake of creating change, right? Sometimes an event gets brought in just for the sake of proving that you can get work done in an organization as an overarching task for everybody in the organization, to break open silos within the organization, right? So the motives are very different for people to want an event, or to want to challenge their event, or to want to look through the lens of their event. Every angle has a...
People are coming to the canvas, so it's not just the that external or internal pressure of something having to change in the event?
Well, sometimes it can be that simple. It's like, we need to achieve the same results with a quarter of the budget, right? For instance, can you design for that to happen? It's basically a new design restriction, right? Or, whatever it might be. There's very clear indications, and that's what's so nice about events, is they're super clear, right? Once an event happens.
It's interesting you say that, because when we talk about clarity, and in my introduction to this piece, I was speaking about objectives, and I speak a lot about objectives, and I think when I'm working with clients, it really helps them focus on what their event is supposed to do at a very initial stage. Do you think I was wrong to focus on objectives? And if not, I suppose where or how are objectives covered within the event canvas?
Yes, that's a great question, because it's the drive to wanting objectivity, but also finding the objective of someone for doing an event. I think the drive behind that is the right drive. The question, what are your objectives? Or what are the objectives of this event? It's a very complex question, because technically what you're asking them to do is to articulate for each stakeholder's perspective, what are the objectives for that stakeholder for this event, because the event itself doesn't have an objective. An event is an inanimate object. It only comes to life when at least two stakeholders get together and change some behavior. So when we talk about why an event needs to take place, we tend to focus on what it is that the people want to have before the event, or how people are before the event, and how they're different after the event. And the way to address that is by looking at their behaviors, because behaviors are the only objectable element of what you can observe with a camera, right? So if I put a camera on somebody's entry and exit behavior and look at what they say and do, that's the truth, or that's the truth I can objectively measure with a camera. I cannot read their mind. I cannot see their feelings. I could assume those things, but I can't literally measure them, or at least we can't do that yet, right? Maybe with new, Apple Watches and all sorts of biometrics, we could do that in the future. Work is happening that way, but let's look at the objective stuff, which is just the behavior. Then still asking an event owner, what's the entry and exit behavior for you of this event for it to make a success, will still startle them and will make them ill-equipped to answer your question. This is the whole reason why we apply this methodology to say, don't answer that question yet, right? The only question you have to answer is this question, which is, do you think it makes sense to spend at least 1% of the total event time, which is, let's pretend 100 people are going to your event and it's going to take 1 day, right? Which is 800 hours, right? 8 hours times 100 people is 800 man hours at the event. Would it make sense to spend at least 1% of that total event time, of that 800 man hours or women hours? Would it make sense to spend 1%, which is 8 hours, to think about how to spend those 800 hours? Does that make sense? Yeah, of course, no brainer, right? Now, you could do that on your own and go and sit there in your chambers and figure out how to do this thing. But then there's no buy-in from the village it takes to pull off an event, right? It takes very capable tradesmen and tradeswomen to be able to create an event. And so how do you make that process fun? Well, it's basically by not having conversations from one person to the other, but creating a motive on the wall, amplifying the problem, like putting up a canvas, equipping people with some Post-its and pens. And it's a very low-tech approach to making the various team members vocal, literally, right? So those that are concealing versus revealing, those that are thoughtful versus talkful. How do you get everybody to be equal in the process? And that's why we use this process very diligently in saying, okay, 1 minute, tell me about stakeholder one, who is representing this specific stakeholder group. What do they see 6 months before the event? What do they think and feel? What do they hear? What do they say and do? What are their pains and gains? And within 1 minute in each quadrant, you walk them through that process and everybody contributes to the process.
Can you think of any positive behaviors that have been changed by any of the clients who have used the canvas?
Sure. So I think as soon as you visualize the story of what change needs to look like in the future, when you can't change something unless you can picture it, right? If you can picture something, and we know a picture is worth 1,000 words, then if that's the case, then a prototype, which is a collection of pictures telling the story, is worth 1,000 meetings, right? This is something that Tom and Dave Kelly at IDEO regularly use as a motive for people to prototype more, to try rough versions first. And so if you can see the picture of the future, and we know a picture is worth 1,000 words, then if you can create a prototype of the future, what does it look like and feel like in the future? Then that prototype is worth 1,000 meetings, right? And most people hate the meetings about meetings, to be truthful, right? How do you reduce those meetings about meetings where people are talking blah, blah, and going like at very different abstract levels of conversation, often at each other instead of at the problem, which should be pointed towards, right? The conversation should be directed towards the event design, not at each other. And so I think if you are able to, and this is, we do this very often, is people come in and say, oh, can you help us design the next event? Or, and then very often, yeah, you could do that, but that's not really what's going to help you, right? I think what's going to help you is design what this event will look like 3 or 4 years from now in an ideal world where you haven't made any decisions yet. Dream up what that looks like. Map that out in a narrative, which gives you much more free thinking from the team involved. And then if you know that you want to do the event on a yearly basis to change that behavior incrementally till you get there, it gives you 4 or 5 steps to try new things to get to that future state, right? And this is a classic thing that's done in, looking at the East versus the Zoll, the future of it, and then figuring out, backcasting to what steps you need to take on the way.
I think that's a really, really important point, because changing people's behavior doesn't happen overnight. And I think
nobody wants to change their behavior, right?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, no, exactly. And as an industry, I think we have to be much more open about what can happen at an event. We still receive marketing material that says, after this event, you will be the super wonderful, fully charged, motivational, new person. And you think, well, that's not true. Perhaps you might be starting this journey, but let's stop trying to sell that this transformative change happens over such a short period of time. And I think you can look at an event as that example, but I think you can also look at the event campus, and you wouldn't be saying at the end of this 8 hours you will have revolutionized the way that you run your events. Yeah. I think what you're saying is you would have started a process that helps you identify the behaviours of stakeholders that you have to change in a positive way, and starting to map out how to achieve that. Yeah. And in my introduction, I have said that this is transformative and revolutionary, but it's not going to happen when you just sit down, make some scribble, stick it on the wall. It's the start of a process that will, I think, really, really affect and change the way the organisers run their events.
Yeah, and well, to that point, what I really, a very good event design, however good it's put on a canvas, and it's not about getting the canvas right, just to be clear, right? So a good event design is not about making a perfect canvas. It's about allowing yourself to make prototypes and try different things, and as a team, get on the same page with regards to what you're trying to do. Without the ability to execute that event, with the tradesmen that know how to deliver on a story live with people without rehearsals, which is very often the definition of an event. It requires a really strong team to stand behind that story and to have co-created the story together, so they feel it's part of what they are and do, and then are able to deliver on that. Right? So I think I don't see event design dissociated from event delivery. Although I think with time, what we're seeing is that with various parts and elements of whether it's event owners or marketeers or vendors or venues or whatever it might be, as soon as they speak each other's language and can interpret how the compass works, they can navigate much better how to get to the end decision and prevent from event design happening iteratively as you go towards the events, right?
Yeah. I think that's a really important point that you've pulled out, that you're not an event designer if you use this canvas. You're an event designer if you run events. No. And I think that's really important. And in my introduction, I spoke about the need for organisers to change their behaviour. And I've suggested that they really have to think of themselves as people who design events rather than produce events. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember when, and there still actually is some people who have this job title, but there was a job title called a conference producer.
Yeah.
And I couldn't think of a worse name for someone who was supposed to design a product that started to change people's behaviour than a producer, because we don't want to produce events, we have to design them. Yeah. And when you take that approach, you really do change the way that you start to look at your events. And I would see in every part of the event canvas and everything that you say, there is a very similar approach around designing rather than just producing what you've always done.
Yeah, it is a process. Right? If you master the process, you can land pretty much any plane, right? But, you know, like in airplanes, you know, we don't have licenses for operating small, medium, or large events, you know, the way you have in civil aviation, where, you know, if you can fly a Cessna 150, it doesn't mean you can land an A380, right? Two different concepts. Well, two similar concepts, but a different, at a different level of complexity. And I think this goes for events in the very same way. I think, those that have experience with events can learn tons from people that know nothing about the event. This is what makes event students really good event designers. They're not biased by the possibility or impossibility of something. But having people with that experience on the team, you know, to counterbalance that naive creativity versus the realities at some stage, you know, which in the process validates to come to a good story, ultimately gives you a balanced view of what can and cannot be done, right?
I really like that idea of the team involvement as well that it has in the canvas, because I think too often an event organizer can feel that they are just alone, and you know, their job is to put into place an event that other people have come up with. Yeah. And you know, I really want to encourage organisers to think of themselves as being crucial in the design part. I don't just want them to an event arrive on their desk and they have to deliver it. They should be helping design it so that they're able to deliver a much better event. I wanted to just ask you briefly before we finish around expectations, because I noticed on the canvas we've got an area around understanding the expectations of stakeholders, and I suppose. The question I wanted to ask you is our job as an event organizer to match those expectations from our stakeholders, or do you think we should try and better those expectations?
I think expectations come later. The first thing to do is to, and this is what we discovered only later, is that you first have to figure out the stakeholder alignment issue, right? So the biggest first problem to have is how misaligned or aligned are your stakeholders to start with regards to the overarching aim of an event, and then with regard to who do you design for, right? You don't need to design for everyone. You just need to design for the people you need to delight, right? The people that have high power and high interest over your event are the ones you single out and you design just for them. If you're trying to design an event for 26 different types of stakeholders and try to keep track of all of those stakes, your head is going to explode, right? And event design is it's like spaghetti that you're trying to kind of organize, right? But like spaghetti, you can't uncook it, right? Once it's there, you've got to figure out how to blend it together. And when you focus on the ones that you need to delight, and you have those stakes very narrowly in your head, you will see who the other stakeholders are and how they go into the fold. So as soon as you figure out the stakeholder alignment, think about those stakes very carefully, validate that thinking. The expectation will automatically fall in line, because as those stakeholders get merged into one story, into one canvas, the rather outrageous expectation of one stakeholder that they can change all of the behavior change in one event, right? Let's take COP, climate change conference for an example. Imagine somebody come up with a concept. Let's do one conference and we'll get everybody in the world to agree on the fact that we should have less climate change, within a 1 week kind of event with multiple thousands of people. Well, it took 24 editions to get to an agreement that nearly everybody ratified, right? So there's only so much behavior change you can change in one event, and sometimes it takes a sequence of events to come to a collective behavior change. And we see those examples all around us. But we also know that events are the most powerful behavior change agent we have on the planet, right? No war starts with a conference, but it does end with one, right? What does that mean, right? So that the orchestrating a dialogue doesn't have to have winners and losers. That's not the metaphor I'm trying to make. But the conversation leads to behavior change, leads to sustainable change in the end, right? And that's why I think they're so important. And we have a huge responsibility. Those that have a very well-developed prefrontal cortex that know about events, why aren't we using that to improve not just the events themselves, because that's not the purpose. The purpose is to change the behavior in the desired direction of change through events, right?
I agree completely. I mean, if you've got to spend half an hour with 15 PowerPoint slides to persuade your client or your stakeholder that you want to run an event,
all you need is one good promise. That's all you need, and the story behind the promise, and then people will either opt in or opt out, and then you can change the world with an event. I'm sure you can.
Well, I started this this podcast by promising people that they would have a fantastic half an hour with you. So I think I've met my one promise in having you. So I'd just like to say thanks very much for all your thoughts. And finally, very briefly, I know that the experienced organisers who are listening to this will want to find a little bit more about the event. So where can they go? And I will put any links that you see on the show notes, but where can they go to find out more about how to get involved with this fantastic process for reimagining their events?
Well, there's three things you can get for free, which people always like, right? The first one is this, but you got to promise to kind of try and fold it into the proper booklet, right? This is the mini canvas book, which will tell you the story in 60 seconds. You can also download half of this for free on our website, the first part, which tells you about the canvas, and then maybe you're interested in getting the other part. The canvas is downloadable for free under Creative Commons, so you can download that. It's in 14 languages with some instructional videos. And all of that, if you look, just Google #event canvas, and you will find the links without a doubt. eventcanvas.org. That's basically where this is available. The reason why we do this is to equip others to be able to do what we do. The more people do this, the easier it's going to get. It's not an easy mission. We're a small team on a big mission. So I want to thank you, William, for giving us this half hour of valuable time with you to share our story. And we hope to hear back from people that are doing this with #event canvas and link to this podcast on how it's working for you.
Fantastic. Okay. And thanks again, Ruud. And we'll see each other soon, I'm sure.
Certainly. Okay. Thank you, William.
Thanks. Bye now.